Hello friends, this is Hari from the channel Decode with me. Today we are going to learn about Android architecture, a formal guide. Let's have a walkthrough. Based on the principles of architecture, the architecture has been classified into three main layers: the UI layer, and the domain layer, and the data layer, where all these three layers communicate with each other based on the design pattern that we adapt. We'll have a deep dive into design pattern briefly later. Now let us take a look onto architecture and why do we need it. Talking about architecture, the very first thing that we need to know is why do we need an architecture? Consider this simple application where it has three layers: the UI layer, and the domain layer, and the data layer, where all these three layers have been classified in all the modules that has been present in an application. For example, in a splash screen you have UI and it has some business logic and it will take some data from a remote source or a local database. So it's the same that applies to all modules. So let us see how these three layers have these responsibilities with all the modules and on what principle these layers are acting on them. First one is the scalability. So you have these modules inside an application which is being isolated from each other, but it can exchange the data. So if you want to increase the functionality of a single module, you can do it without disturbing other modules, which increases the app's robustness. And if you want to test a single module, you can do that without affecting other modules, and also you can decouple it with the other modules that it has been connected. Consider an example. For a login page, you have the UI part where you get the username and password from the user end, and there will be a business logic which resides in the domain layer where it has to validate that the username or password is correct. With the data layer, it will connect to the remote source so that it will verify that the provided username or password is correct or not. So in such a case where you can be able to test the correctness of the login module without affecting other modules. So consider an example. If you want to mock the data that has been coming from the data layer, so you can do that by decoupling the data layer with the domain layer and provide a hard-coded username or password to try and log in, which is not an actual working of an remote source validation, but it will show you how the simulation works. So I'm just saying an example how an unit test works, which is data driven. So in all these modules in the application, it is completely data driven. From the data that has been provided to each of the layers, it will act upon accordingly. For example, consider a splash screen. The inputs are like the application name and for how many seconds the splash screen has to be shown on the screen. So in a scenario where you have to show it for 3 seconds, the 3 seconds and the application name is the underlying data that has been provided to the screen, based on which the screen acts. So this is decided in the domain layer, so which carries the business logic. So the domain layer carries the business logic for how many seconds it need to show and what is the application name it need to show. So it is based on certain condition, like it can be stored locally in a data source or it can be from a remote data source. So it is entirely based on the business logic that you have designed in the domain layer. Based on the decided decision, the data has been pushed to the UI layer where the screen pops up showing the application name with how many seconds that it has to be shown on the screen, and it will navigate to the login page. So this is how a data driven model will work. An application architecture defines the boundaries between the parts of the app and the responsibilities that each part should have. So the splash screen carries the responsibility for showing it for some few seconds, and later it decides to which screen it should go. This is the responsibility of a splash screen. The same applies for all the modules in application where each carries a business logic and from where the data need to be fetched and what screen should be cropped and from where it should go and where it should get. So this is how an UI layer and a domain layer and data layer will act upon the modules that has been present. So this is not the final outcome of the layers that we'll be working on. This is a basic principle architecture, so based on which certain design patterns have been designed to make the application work smoother and according to the requirement that we have. What is happening in these layers deep down? Let us see briefly what's happening in these layers relating to the Android architecture in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and like the video and press the bell icon for getting notified for my future videos.